It's a powerful story about someone, Mr. Hall, who knew that he was never rightfully convicted, knew that he was never at the scene of the crime, knew that he had no motive, knew that he had no connection, knew that he was wrongfully identified, and never stopped to get everyone else to see that as well.
This podcast is brought to you by the Pro Bono Institute. PBI is a nonprofit organization that supports, enhances, and helps to transform the pro bono efforts of major law firms, in-house corporate legal departments, and public interest organizations in the U.S. and around the world. Welcome to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. I'm your host, Nihad Mansour, Assistant Director of the law firm Pro Bono Project. In today's Challenge Signatory Showcase episode, I'm speaking with David Alexander, a third-year litigation associate at Kramer Levin, about the firm's successful effort with the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project to overturn the wrongful conviction of Anthony Hall, a Baltimore man who spent over 25 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. David joins me to share more about this powerful pro bono win and its impact. We find out about the amazing pro bono work by law firms and corporations through PBI's annual surveys sent to signatories of the Law Firm Pro Bono Challenge Initiative and the Corporate Pro Bono Challenge Initiative. PBI uses the surveys as an essential source of both quantitative and qualitative information about the pro bono programs of law firms and in-house corporate legal departments, and produces both a law firm challenge report and a CPBO challenge report every June with the data collected. Check out this year's challenge reports on PBI's website. Let's get into today's showcase.
Kramer Levin attorneys, along with the law firm Harris, St. Laurent, and Washington LLP and the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project, successfully petitioned a Maryland state court to grant a writ of actual innocence for Mr. Anthony Hall, who was a Black man from Baltimore, Maryland, overturning his 1992 conviction for murder. Mr. Hall had served 25 years after being convicted based solely on the testimony of two purported eyewitnesses and no physical evidence tying him to the crime. The team convinced the court that there was significant evidence that had been discovered after Mr. Hall's trial, showing that he was not the perpetrator and had been wrongfully identified. In following the decision, state prosecutors declined to pursue a new trial against Mr. Hall and informally dismissed his case. So, to kind of add more detail to that, Mr. Hall was charged with second-degree murder and the use of a handgun to commit a felony in 1991. The victim had been found shot in the side, and Mr. Hall, after a trial, was convicted of the same counts, right? So second-degree murder and use of a handgun to commit a felony. At trial, there were actually two witnesses who identified Mr. Hall as the shooter, but no physical evidence tying Mr. Hall to the crime or any apparent motive. Mr. Hall never stopped fighting, though, to overturn his wrongful conviction. And finally, in 2017, one eyewitness admitted they were pressured by police to misidentify Mr. Hall, and another eyewitness stated that Mr. Hall was actually not the shooter. It was also discovered that the state of Maryland had withheld numerous exculpatory and contradictory eyewitness statements. And so all of that went into our writ of actual submission, which we filed and argued in March of 2023, and the judge there granted our writ in March 2023 as well.
What type of pro bono legal services did Kramer Levin attorneys provide in this case?
Kramer Levin acted as co-counsel to Harris, St. Laurent, and Washler, our partner Barry Pollock, and the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project, which is one of the subsets of the Innocence Project overall. The Innocence Project actually gathered much of the new evidence we used in the new petition. Individually, I joined the matter after I joined Kramer Levin, and not too long before the hearing on the writ of actual innocence.
Was this one of your first pro bono cases?
Yes, not only one of my first pro bono cases, but one of my first cases, period, at the firm.
Wow. So how was that for you?
It was really exciting. It was a case that felt very impactful to me, something that I wanted to work on. It was a case that provided opportunities for me to do things that because I just started the firm, hadn't had the opportunity to do, get a sense of what it was like to prepare for a hearing and the preparation that goes into that. And obviously, as you said, the story, being able to be a small part of correcting something that went horribly wrong so long ago. I was very honored to be a part of that.
What were some of the main challenges while working on this pro bono case, and how were those challenges addressed?
For an older case like this one, right, Mr. Hall's first trial was in 1991. it presents a lot of difficulties in terms of gathering new evidence. And for context, when you file a writ for actual innocence in Baltimore or Maryland, you have to prove that you have new evidence now that could not have been discovered then, that could have potentially changed the outcome of the case. And so for a case like this, where everything happened in the early 90s, trying to go back and find new evidence obviously presented a lot of difficulties. And the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project had to find and interview people who had been involved in the original case, the original investigation, and then also submit requests for police records. And, because the time, often people had moved, they'd forgotten details of the case. It was a 2-day trial, so people had forgotten what had happened, or they were unwilling to testify or be interviewed. So that was definitely one challenge, was just going to go back and uncover what had actually happened close to 30 years ago. But another challenge was preparing to refute the original eyewitness testimony from the trial, right? So at the trial, two people had testified and said that they saw Mr. Hall chasing after the victim right before he was shot. Now, right, in 2025, eyewitness testimony is understood to be potentially fallible because of the fact that human memory and perception can also be potentially fallible, especially in circumstances like this one where you're witnessing a robbery or a murder firsthand. What you believe you can recall might be different from what actually happens, and the science supports that. But during Mr. Hall's original trial, the science that essentially challenged the reliability of eyewitness testimony hadn't been done yet, right? So the papers hadn't been published, the results hadn't been corroborated. It's new evidence now that Mr. Hall can rely on, but back then he obviously couldn't have used it. And so we wanted to present a scientific argument against the reliability of that eyewitness testimony from 1991. So if the court wasn't convinced by the evidence of the withheld statements or the contradictory statements based on what people have provided to the police the night of the murder versus before the trial, and the discrepancies there, if all that didn't fail to convince the judge, we had this other argument to rely on about the reliability of the eyewitness testimony from the trial. So that was another difficult thing that we had to work through in terms of preparing that argument for the hearing.
How do you think this case could inspire reforms in the criminal justice system to prevent wrongful convictions, particularly in cases with no physical evidence?
So I think there's two things here. For one, as we talked about, right, more rigorous eyewitness testimony standards need to be established and refined to safeguard against unreliable and inaccurate claims. So as you just mentioned, this happens very frequently. In fact, the Innocence Project estimates that 63% of wrongful convictions actually involve eyewitness misidentification. So having the appropriate standards here and the safeguards to make sure that when people testify, that the jury or the judge understands the reliability of their testimony and the science that surrounds that is really important. Another point is that exculpatory evidence was also withheld by the state in the initial case, which highlights both the need for strict disclosure requirements and appropriate oversight and training to protect against pressurings from police, and also ensure that criminal defendants have access to all materials that may be useful to them in their defense. That's certainly something that happened here, and so making sure that those disclosure requirements are honored and that there's training and protocols to make sure that's followed in every scenario, so that every criminal defendant has access to those materials is really important. There's also a need for ongoing legislative changes to provide avenues for relief and compensation to innocent individuals who are wrongfully convicted, like Mr. Hall. Not every state in the U.S. even offers compensation to wrongfully convicted individuals. Maryland passed their compensation law in 2021. More so than reform, I think this case and the work the Innocence Project does is an ongoing reminder that we will never know the true number of people who have been wrongfully convicted. Right? So supporting groups like the Innocence Project that do this work on a daily basis is crucial, because they find these people who have been wronged, they litigate on their behalf, and they also advocate to their local legislators to pass different types of laws that provide compensation or provide different avenues for relief or change the standards that need to be met in terms of these types of cases. So supporting the people who are kind of on the front lines is something else that is really important.
What would you say are the most rewarding aspects of working on this type of pro bono case?
It's hard to feel good about a case like this when he was 28, right? Mr. Hall was wrongfully convicted. He spent 25 years in jail, and he finally obtained this writ of actual innocence 2 years ago. And I'm grateful that since then, Mr. Hall has received compensation from the Maryland Board of Public Works for his time spent wrongfully convicted. But I think I echo the sentiments of the Maryland governor, Wes Moore, when he spoke about Mr. Hall some time ago. He said Mr. Hall spent, I quote here, 9,072 days behind bars. He was robbed of this time of his life. He's robbed of his time with his family. He was robbed of his time to pursue his dreams. Mr. Hall now is 61, or maybe 62 at this point. And there's no amount of money or apologies or platitudes that we can give to right the wrongs that have happened to him in his life. And so I feel it's important, right? It's necessary to do this type of work. And I'm honored to have played a small part in ensuring the outcome at the hearing was the right one. But there really is nothing we can do to give Mr. Hall back the time that was taken. So I think that's what I think about when I think about this case. But I'm also sort of a separate extent grateful to have the opportunity as a junior associate to help prepare for the hearing, specifically with the expert witness and eyewitness testimony, preparing for the trial, right? So getting to do this stuff, work with the more senior attorneys, and be part of a joint defense group is something that I'm very grateful to have experienced. But when I think about this case, both then and now, I feel like we did the right thing, but I feel like the wrong thing was done 25 years ago, and there's no way to correct that.
I got chills when you said all that.
Is there any advice that you would give to other attorneys who are considering wrongful conviction pro bono cases?
I would encourage junior associates to get involved as much as they can with pro bono programs that are offered by their firms, and really to find opportunities within there that they are passionate about. As I've seen both from this case and the other work that I've done at Kramer Levin since, these opportunities can provide training, but also allow you to work on something that can be really impactful and really personal to the people who are involved. And the reason I was able to work on this case is because of the firm's longstanding commitment to providing pro bono opportunities that give junior associates these opportunities to be involved early on and really do impactful work. So I think I would encourage junior associates to do that. I would also add, lean on your relationships with more senior attorneys, both in and outside the firm. Like I said, this was a collaborative effort between us, with the law firm, and the Innocence Project. And so the fact that we were all interested in working on this, we're able to help each other out and provide that support was really useful in this particular case. And finally, I would just echo what I said earlier. The work that the Innocence Project is doing every day is critical, right? They're constantly investigating and trying to find out if they can find evidence for these types of claims. They're litigating these claims on behalf of people who have been wrongfully convicted, and they're advocating for better legislation in terms of compensation, in terms of, like I said, the standards for relief, in terms of getting people to have awareness about this and how it goes wrong, in terms of developing statistical analyses about how people are misidentified or false confessions, the things that go into wrongful convictions. And that work is vital. And so if there are opportunities to get involved with them in the different ways they're trying to change the narrative and change people's lives for the better and correct these mistakes, that's definitely something that people should do. I'm honored to have played a small role in correcting what has gone wrong for Mr. Hall. That's important to me, to be a part of that. And like I said, even though we can't give him the time back, that's an excuse us from the responsibility of correcting the mistakes that we've seen.
Thanks to David Alexander for his leadership and expertise. Special thanks to Kramer Levin for doing great work and being a law firm pro bono challenge signatory. If your law firm or in-house legal department is interested in becoming a challenge signatory, check out PBI's website for more information. Thanks for listening, and be sure to tune in next time on the Pro Bono Happy Hour's Challenge Signatory Showcase series to hear more about innovative pro bono work.